Hi, friends. I'm Sterling Hart, and this is Dreamlight, where we work with dream interpretation and using the insights in waking life. What does dreaming of a funeral mean? This kind of dream deals with one of dreaming's most fundamental themes, change. Typically, death in dreams represents an aspect of yourself that is changing. So the funeral symbolizes the death of a part of yourself. What is dying is a role or a personality trait, a relationship to another person or group. It can also be an identity. It could even be a perspective or set of values. For instance, when you graduate high school, parts of you, social roles, identities, activities, interests, and relationships, will be left behind. A role is a part you play in a system. For instance, your role amongst your friends might be the instigator, or you are the grounded one. There are activities and behaviors, expectations that go with a given role. Typical roles are things like a caretaker or a leader. Personality traits are good or bad qualities. Things like being trusting or open to new ideas, or the opposite, you could be narrow, angry, or defensive. These can change over time due to our experiences, conditioning, or self-awareness. Our self-definition and roles, even our outlooks, are interconnected with various qualities, such as looking at the world as dark and hopeless when we are depressed, or as full of possibility when we are in love. As these qualities or traits change you, you can feel the loss. They don't exist in isolation. There is a web of connections to people in our world. In dealing with change, there are, in effect, two sides, the past and the future. Death deals with what you are letting go of. Dreams can also show what is coming into being. Relationships change over time. For example, you can get a divorce and your role as a husband or wife dies, but you could still have an active relationship due to children. You may even be friends. In the dream, you may see yourself or someone dead, and they return later in the dream alive because the relationship continues in a new way. It can be a situation with mixed emotions and change how we view ourselves. An identity is your sense of who you are, what you identify as, and what you identify with. This is often how we represent ourselves to others. For instance, you may no longer be a student when you graduate. You may change your activities, such as studying or hanging out with the people who help you study. So the role of being a student shifts, which can change your sense of who you are as a person and your identity. You might become an employee or a specific professional. Important things or a big part of your life, such as sports, may disappear. So a funeral usually represents a death of some aspect of ourselves, and in dreams there are four kinds. You attend your own funeral. You are in the coffin. You are attending someone else's funeral. A funeral is referenced. Just because there is a funeral doesn't mean someone is dead. In a dream, you can attend someone else's funeral and find them alive. What is ending or has ended in the past that you are dealing with now? Is there a social or community aspect to it? Most of us are afraid of the future in some way. Fear inhibits and stifles our actions. So the funeral can represent what is dead in us because of our fears. If we are afraid and don't allow ourselves to pursue our happiness, it is like we are dead. Whoever the funeral is for in the dream, that is a symbol of an aspect of ourselves. When looking at fear of the future, it is often intertwined with our sense of community. The best self-defense is to live in a community where you don't need to defend yourself. Having a support system that can provide for needs and help generate opportunities removes the need to feel safe. A funeral can be a symbol involving a community. Most fears in waking life are imaginary, and it is important to counter fears with clarity so we can live fully. Examine your association with funerals. Funerals have to be organized and paid for. Money issues can creep in, and so too legal aspects, settling estates, dealing with possessions, and inheritance. Having made funeral arrangements before, this would be part of my associations. Those associations may only arise if you have arranged one or thought about it. Some people have never attended a funeral. Funerals are social gatherings. You may see relatives or friends you haven't seen in a long time with happy consequences. There can be religious elements, and there can also be spiritual elements in the sense of what is ultimately of value to you. Does the funeral reflect the person or an institution like the church? There can be a question about how to act or what you should feel at funerals. Sometimes there is much awkwardness. They are often formal occasions. I had to buy new clothes to attend one. A friend's husband passed away, and his family came from around the country and were in the reception line greeting everyone who attended the viewing. The relatives were uncomfortable dealing with all of these people who knew their brother better than they did. They only saw him once for a few days every few years, over 40 years or so, and their brother had been very active and established in the local community. You can attend the funeral for social reasons for someone you didn't like, so you may question what the motivation is for you to attend the funeral. I have seen people act out on the way to funerals because they wanted to distract themselves from how they felt about it. Sometimes there is fear, anger, or regret. How you feel may be directed towards the deceased, or you may turn it inward to reflect on what life means. In the dream, this distraction or avoiding things may be part of the meaning. There can be layers. For instance, I knew someone who feared people leaving them suddenly because of a loss of a parent at an early age. Funerals are for the young. Older people may not have friends who are still alive or can travel when they pass away. Though they can be honored by their community, those accomplishments may have faded due to the passage of time. Sometimes funerals are where we discover things about the deceased we didn't know. People go through what's left behind when someone passes away and discovers things. These can be very revealing, even disturbing, and sometimes these are shared at funerals. I have spoken at funerals before sharing memories of the deceased. I surprised people who only knew the deceased from a specific period or in a particular setting, and they knew little of other parts of the deceased's life. Funerals can be a public spectacle, such as the Queen's, or they may be a private and even unattended, such as Eleanor Rigby. There can be many reactions to the deceased: a sense of loss if the death was tragic, such as a young person in an accident, or a sense of loss as the person was the key to the family or a powerful influence on people. There can be a sense of anger or betrayal at their leaving. In the dream, there may be emotional content or none at all. It can be heavy or light. Funerals can be a kind of mental symbol dealing primarily with ideas. There can also be relief when someone passes away after suffering an extended illness or being incapacitated with poor quality of life, or relief if the person was abusive, as people are glad that the abuser died. Being at your own funeral would indicate that you are aware or becoming aware that some part of you is changing, and that you can separate yourself from it. You can step back and witness it. The funeral could suggest that it has already happened, and you are waking up to something that has changed. Dreams contain subconscious elements such as old patterns and associations, our memories. They can reflect the ego's story. Our ego story, what we think we are and are doing, may have a different time arc and pacing as things can be slowly developing or changing, and we are not consciously aware of it until we have hindsight. For example, relationships can gradually change and be kept up for a long time by habits. By interpreting dreams, we become more aware of how our mind works and see these subconscious processes. We can become more aware and deal with them in the real time. It can also be that you see this coming and are preparing or beginning to work through feelings, ideas, and issues, or you could realize this is going on currently, or even you are starting to realize it has already happened. So the death has occurred, and you are at the symbolic funeral saying goodbye. The funeral may mark a more formal recognition of the change in the waking time. Looking at associations, is there any sense of time, yesterday, last week, or months? I once changed jobs and had to move. I was so busy and challenged by a new job in a new city that I didn't get a chance to process it all till over a year later. I have talked with friends who would get anxious several times a year for no reason, only to realize it was associated with their final exams, and it was at a school that they had long since graduated from. A physical emotional habit linked to the time of year and change in the seasons is common. Attending the funeral for yourself or someone else indicates more distance, but essentially it is the same. If it is someone else, they represent something of yourself, something identified with them. You would want to pursue a line of questions about what that person means to you, what strikes you about them, who you are or were with them, looking at what memories and observations come up. A reference to a funeral may refer to something of the past that has come up, how you got through it or the changes that came with it. For instance, my friend had a dream involving going to Alaska, and he was driving. At one point, he remembered passing a place where he attended a funeral. In examining the dream, Alaska to him meant getting away on a big adventure. He had a distant relative that had gone to live in a cabin in Alaska, part of his family mythology. The memory of the funeral seemed to link him to when he was a kid. They used to go on vacation to see his grandpa. His dad and grandfather were into cars, and they always spent time doing work on them. He didn't like working on cars at the time. The grandfather had passed away, and he never really dealt with cars again, and the family had gone on different vacations. The dream reflected his situation. He had given up taking the next level promotion at work, which would have been high stress and involved long hours, and he realized he needed a different challenge. So I had a dream where I drove up to a building. The drive went around it like it was a bank drive-through. I saw a white car parked on my right in the drive. Then I realized it was a hearse, a vehicle used for carrying caskets. To my left was another car, and I realized a lifeless woman was inside. I saw her in a dress, and she was the deceased. It didn't look realistic, but was rather cartoon-like. I could then feel this inertia or lifelessness. This brought up several associations. One was the hearse. Where I used to get coffee, I would see this bright pink car parked at the muffler shop. It was a hearse. I always thought it was clever because you saw the pink first and the hearse second. Another association had to do with an interview I heard decades ago. Some brothers in England own a funeral home and began to offer non-traditional funerals. They would celebrate the life of the person. If you were into photography, they would display photos the person took. The idea was to offer something other than the dry Episcopalian service that was very somber and inappropriate for everyone. This made them overwhelmingly successful, and they were quickly copied. I myself arranged for a display of over 60 quilts at my mother's funeral and gave many of those quilts away to people who came. The second thing with the dream was that the drive-up nature of the building was out of place for the solemnity of the funeral. The woman wasn't real, but rather a cartoon. This seems like a symbol of an emotional aspect, the feeling I recognize from having to handle a deceased pet for someone. I have also felt this from people occasionally. This would indicate that something was sucking my energy. I also associate this with things being twisted by emotions or agendas. The other aspect was the divided drive, which represents a decision, which way to go. On the one side is the woman, and on the other side is the hearse. Another is, having taught yoga full-time for decades, I have taken workshops and trained on the death process and have often been called upon to help people understand that. So it represents a chance to be sincere about one's beliefs, integrate various experiences, and assimilate the lessons. From this it seemed apparent that I could feel one way or another. I could let something bring me down, or I could feel positive. And this was obviously about work. Deep down I knew things were fine and going on as they should be, but there were various pressures from others to look at it negatively. I had to choose, and there was some finality to it. Death is how you frame it. And there is also a vehicle. It is not an end, but a transition. Dreaming of a funeral can be scary on waking. Most dreams are psychological and reflects processes related to what you have been focused on during the day. Subliminal dreams are one where we deal with a broader consciousness or deeper consciousness with access to greater resources. This is the source of prophetic dreams and intuition. I have encountered dreams dealing with the coming death of someone, and they were constantly dealing either with the effect of someone passing away on the dreamer, or they were kind of contact with the deceased or soon-to-be deceased person. Often they would appear with a message, so I would suggest that a funeral dream is not likely to be predictive of death, but rather of changes to the self. But as always, anything is possible. If you got something out of this video, please hit the like. If you want more dreams, subscribe or support the channel on Patreon with the link below. Till next time.